Anastasiia Zagoruichyk is an expert on energy and climate policy. She is a graduate of Oxford University in sustainability, enterprise, and the environment, and currently is part of Pacific Northwest National Lab. Well, I'll ask her in a minute to give the full details of what she's working on and where that is and what her ambitions are. Before we do that, just a quick reminder to check out the validated Ukrainian charities that appear in the description of the video. It's incredibly important to help Ukraine remain resistant and resilient when it's under an extraordinary aggressive assault by its neighbor, Russia. And that has never been more true than it is this week when we've seen absolutely terrible scenes of carnage as Russia have lobbed missiles and glide bombs and so on into residential areas of peaceful Ukrainian cities. Anastasia, welcome to the channel.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks for inviting me to talk about such an important topic of green reconstruction. I've been advocating for it since the beginning of the invasion, and so I'm originally myself from Kyiv, from Ukraine, and right now I'm working as a researcher at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, where my work is mostly focused on energy projects in Ukraine within the Net Zero World Initiative, which was launched by the US Department of Energy. Yes, as you've told, I'm a graduate of Oxford Smith's School of Enterprise and Environment, and in Ukraine, I was chairing an environmental NGO advocating for environmental reforms and industrial modernization. Also, I was head editor of the Oxford Climate Review and a journalist at the UK-based media outlet Carbon Brief.
That's fantastic. And that's an extraordinary amount of authority and pedigree in the topic there. And we're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk, of course, about the environment and sustainability. And prior to the full-scale war, these topics, of course, are important as Ukraine looks west to transition, become a modern democracy and reform its economy, judiciary, and, of course, infrastructure in order to become sustainable and resilient. But we do have the full scale war. So, have these topics actually, some people might think they become less important at wartime, but actually, in your view, are they more important because they're going to play a crucial role in helping Ukraine to remain not just resilient, but also energy independent?
Yeah, exactly. And I will start with the just saying that Russia is destroying everything in Ukraine. They're attacking children's hospitals, maternity hospitals, schools, universities, and they're trying to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure and target all of the civilian objects, actually. So basically, Russia is using the scorched earth tactics as its military strategy. And of course, it's all has its impact on environment as well. So Jonathan, you told me that you've been to Ukraine. I bet you saw all of this beautiful nature and forests there. And right now, all of those bombs, missiles, they're destroying those forests. They're around 1,000 square kilometers of forests have been burned. It's equivalent to 140,000 football fields. And of course, all of those actions impact Ukrainian flora and fauna. Like around 1,000 dolphins were already killed in the Black and Azov seas due to mines and due to Russian ships. Russians are even stealing our animals from the conservation parks. So we have a largest in Ukraine conservation park in Kherson Oblast, Askania Nova. And recently the authorities stated there are almost no animals left there because Russia have stolen them and moved to Russia, and we don't know what will happen to them there. Of course, all of those military actions, they are destroying the critical infrastructure, the water treatment facilities, water pipelines, sewage systems, and of course, it leads to discharge of untreated wastewater into water bodies and leaks of hazardous substances and disruptions in water supply, actually. So all of those actions have their consequences, and they will be irreversible. But what I want to note as well, that the war has caused or paved the way for up to 200 million CO2 emissions. And the use of bombs, missiles, the consumption of oil products, and fires at the petroleum storage depots, just fires in the buildings and infrastructure, it's all led to enormous amount of CO2 emissions. And it's striking to see that Russia is still invited to the high-level events such as Conference of the Parties, where they're stating that they're protecting climate change. And Russia was attending this UN conference last year and the year before last year, and will probably attend this year as well, as the COP will be held in Azerbaijan. So this is a mystery for me why the main polluter and still given the platform to speak about climate change protection at such high level events.
And that's extraordinary. And in some ways, I mean, this is a very broad level, but Russia is very much an economy based on extraction industries, and of course, hydrocarbons plays a huge role in that, in sustaining Russia's economy. It has created the pool of financial reserves that allowed Putin to think he could launch this war and get away with it. So the idea that Russia is part of a green future is laughable on numerous levels. This isn't one of our scripted questions, but do you find that there is really not enough focus on this topic, that Russia, through its war, through its aggression, is fueling climate change and adding a vast amount of carbon to the atmosphere? And we saw just a couple of weeks ago, it was commented on by Elena Khalshka, the only pure carbon zero green school, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, was near Kharkiv, that was destroyed by Russians. So they are also destroying the green potential of its neighboring country, Ukraine.
Exactly. Russia was actually contributing to climate change a lot, even before the war. So it was is the third highest emitter in history, and responsible for some 7% of global cumulative CO2 emissions. And of course, right now, their supplies stopped to the EU, but still they're still exporting an enormous amount of oil and gas, and they were trying to kind of blackmail European Union with the gas supplies, but they failed. Luckily, the EU has found another routes to safeguard the supplies of gas for winter, and building the LNG terminals. But I think, yeah, there is definitely not enough attention to what Russia is doing, not only in Ukraine, but beyond Ukraine, just destroying our world with its all of this fossil fuels that then they're not even going to stop to use those fossil fuels, of course. And in some of their documents, they're saying that climate change is good because the permafrost will thaw, and their icebreakers will be easier to go through, and that's why the trade will be better. And when I was reading those documents, it was so hilarious that they are just don't understand these issues that the whole civilized world already understands and tries to do something with that.
And we'll come next to the idea of ecocide, which again, myself and some of the sort of colleagues that I collaborate with, I think, have been shocked throughout this war that issues such as the Kakhovka Dam destruction, which caused terrible environmental damage, which, as you say, that those ecosystems may not recover, and certainly won't recover in the same way back to what they were before, releasing heavy metals, mines, and all sorts of organic toxic matter into the waters. So one, there is using the ecology as a weapon of war. That's really, the question I'm going to throw to you. Does Russia have any limits where that's concerned? But before I go there, I just wanted to share with the audience. They may think, that some of these things sound extreme. They may project their own Western values onto Russia. And I can say this is absolutely not the case. And when I took trains north, south, east, and west, right across Russia in the 90s, and I suspect it hasn't changed at all in the 2000s, and traveled many, many thousands of miles and walked in woods and forests, very close to villages and so on. And I can say that the Russians generally treat the environment in an appalling manner. The Soviet Union was a massive despoiler of the environment. They built factories that poisoned lakes and land, and these factories would march alongside the rail tracks, not just for sort of, a mile or two, but tens of miles, single factories, such as the ones producing tanks and so on. And so any idea that Russia is a guardian of the environment, I'm afraid, is absolutely laughable for anybody who's actually been in Russia and seen how the environment is used as a sort of it's almost like a sort of primitive strategy of slash and burn. You destroy the land and you move on. There's no sense of guardianship. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. I wanted to share that with the audience because I think that's quite important. But over to you, ecocide as a weapon of war.
Yeah, I will start actually with the fact that the explosion of Kakhovka Dam killed around 30 people and left multiple families without a home. So they had to evacuate and they have nothing to return to. And up to 1 million people have lost the access to drinking water because of it. Because actually the dam was the 30 meters high wall and storing 18 billion cubic meters of water. And imagine all of those water pouring downstream, destroying everything on its way, the houses, the infrastructure, killing cattle and a lot of natural habitats. I don't know, have you seen the photos, how people are trying to save the cows and holding dogs in their hands? And it was, it is indeed a disaster. And Ukrainian government calculated the damage, and it is estimated at around $14 billion. And half of that is an estimate of lost ecosystem services due to chemical pollution and habitat destruction along the Dnipro, which is one of the largest Europe's river. But another issue with the Kakhovka Dam and water access is that the irrigation of crops in that area is undermined. The southern Ukraine is the main location for agricultural activity, and all of those surrounding fields, they relied on Kakhovka Reservoir for their irrigation purposes. And right now, of course, the farmers are struggling with the lack of this water. Kakhovka Reservoir also provided the water for cooling ponds at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So by doing this action, they caused so many disastrous consequences that that neither nature, neither the nation will recover from it in any time soon.
Well, that leads to two important questions. One is about the use of nuclear power, civic nuclear power, as a form of blackmail, and Russia's preparedness to turn the Zaporizhia and potentially the Kursk power station as well into dirty bombs, plausibly deniable disasters, which nonetheless, I think, there are people who wouldn't be fooled if Russia did that. But certainly the threat is there. The other one, of course, is recovery in the Donbass and the east, and the extent to which that legacy of damage cannot be undone, both the impact on industry and agriculture. But let's start with the other weapon of war, which is nuclear blackmail. Were you surprised to read about their behavior in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and the stories surrounding Zaporizhia and now Kursk?
Yeah, I will just quickly add to the previous point, which will also lead to story about the radioactive activities. So Russians are still trying to destroy Kiev Dam and Dnipro dams. So they keep targeting those critical infrastructure facilities, and the fact that if the water in Kiev reservoir drops, it could expose a significant amount of radioactive silt that has remained there since 1986. And experts warn that if this silt dries and turns into a radioactive dust and begins to spread, that can lead to a very dangerous consequences. Yeah, when they started, when they entered through the Chernobyl zone, and when they occupied Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, it was definitely a shock. And Russia is using the nuclear blackmail by occupying the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and it's also among the top 10 largest in the world. So Ukrainians remember the consequences of 1986 Chernobyl disaster, and we understand the dangers of improperly managed radioactivity. And Russia has consistently disregarded the safety measures at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And we even the head of International Atomic Energy Agency stated that they are storing explosive mines near the facilities. We saw multiple footage that they're striking on the from the Zaporizhia sites on the Ukraine controlled territories, and this is just the news that the world has seen, and the IAEA has been just issued some warnings and concerns. But beyond the safety risks at the site itself, Russian forces have kept the personnel of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and their families in captivity, subjected to torture. So we still don't know if everyone has been safely released, but it's another dimension of this nuclear occupation and blackmailing, is that the international laws and regulations, they don't know what to do in these cases. They didn't think about the personal safety and how they can be protected. So there were some people who just voluntarily stayed and, of course, keep the nuclear power plant running, because you cannot just shut down it, right? If anything will happen to Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, again, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, the consequences would be catastrophic, because not only in Ukraine, but far beyond Ukraine. And this is a very definition of terrorism, I would say.
That's absolutely. And we've seen that they are prepared to do these things through, as you mentioned, Kakhovka, but also simply the behavior around the Chernobyl exclusion zone, digging trenches, sending radioactive dust into the atmosphere, a complete disregard, not just of Ukrainian safety, but their own safety as well, a complete contempt for their own people.
Yes. The history with Chernobyl zone is also that in 2021 there were massive fires because of drought, and the radioactive level of the radioactivity was pretty high, and there was like a state environmental inspectorate there, and multiple people that were scared about their lives, and probably they saw this news as well, and then they're going there and also like using this as the battlefield, which doesn't make any sense, as they perfectly know that the radioactivity is still there, and especially if it all goes on fire, it will be definitely like a disastrous consequences for their own people. But we saw that they don't care about their own people at all. So this is, I would say, not a surprise for me.
Let's turn to reconstruction and resilience, though, because we've talked about Russia's acts here to try and target hydroelectric plants and dams, and they've had some success in doing that, at least destroying the hydroelectric power capacity. Part of the energy infrastructure investment process that I think you're talking about is that actually hydroelectric plays a crucial role in the green evolution of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. But how is it possible to do this and minimize the risks of having sort of large, high investment infrastructure that could potentially be targeted in the future? Is there a way to make hydroelectric more resilient, potentially to have far more installations but on a smaller scale and more widely distributed? What's your vision for a hydroelectric future?
I think I would start with the explaining to our listeners and viewers what is going on with the energy infrastructure in Ukraine today, and that Russia has destroyed more than half of electricity generation capacity in Ukraine. So it dropped from 50 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts. It's partially because of occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but also 90% of thermal power plant capacities, they have been destroyed, which are mostly the coal thermal power plants. Russians have also occupied our renewables capacity, have stolen the solar panels, and occupied 80% of wind and 20% of solar. And of course, the destruction of Kakhovka hydropower plant, and for the last couple of months, they're targeting the energy infrastructure again, trying to cut us off from the light and heat and electricity. But actually, I would say that the war has shown that distributed energy resources are the key to energy security, and I would say that the investments should and all the funding should prioritize the solar photovoltaics, wind generation, gas turbine power plants, and battery storages. So all of those modular equipment that can be relatively quickly assembled and rebuilt. Regarding the hydroelectric power plants, I wouldn't say that this is the biggest kind of priority right now. I would still focus on something more modular and that can be quickly built, moved, and rebuilt. So, for example, when a Russian missile hit one of the DTEKs, so DTEK is the largest Ukraine's energy company, and when the missile hit DTEK's solar power plant fields, they repaired the damage in just 4 days. And the CEO of DTEK himself emphasizes that it's only one missile to destroy a 300 megawatts coal-fired power station, and but the Russians need 50 missiles to destroy the same capacities in a wind farm. And I think this is a very strong argument for the clean energy transition. Of course, it would be great to have some grants for just people so they can install the solar photovoltaics on their rooftops and be independent from the centralized electricity. And I would say that investments in distributed energy resources, they're not just important from the energy security point of view, but from the point of view that Ukraine, as the EU candidate, has its own obligations in terms of the how many distributed the amount of renewables in its share of the energy system. So, for example, according to the recently adopted National Energy and Climate Plan, Ukraine has to have at least 27% of renewables by 2030 in its energy share mix.
And what's interesting about that, I think, and a recent resilience sort of climate event really sort of opened my eyes to some of these questions. But one, of course, is that the energy grid and the location of electricity generating facilities, as well as heavy industry, very much is an inheritance of the Soviet system, which, of course, is designed to be an integrated system, not with Europe, but with Russia itself, with the East as a pivotal territory. That, of course, now under occupation is cut off. And Ukraine is looking west. But to re-engineer the entire system and to relocate all the plants strategically based on the current strategy and not the strategy in place during the Soviet period, that's quite a challenge, isn't it? So in this green renewal that you write eloquently about, does this mean a radical rethinking about where electricity plants, heavy industry, and something like green steel, which we're going to come to in a minute, a radical rethinking on where these are located?
Yeah, and going back to the economy and industry, I would also like to start with the setting the scene and explaining that Ukraine has, like the war, of course, has caused catastrophic consequences for the economy. And in just 1 year, Ukraine's GDP dropped by 30%. Just for understanding, for comparison, during the Great Recession, the world's biggest financial crisis, the US GDP dropped by 4%, and Ukraine is 30% right now. We have 20% of population left the country, and the projections regarding the population that we have population only declining in the future. So of course, we do need to have to think about our economy reconstruction, and that's what I has been emphasizing, that we have to prevent from locking ourselves into that fossil fuel based infrastructure as the whole world is moving towards the net zero transition. And yeah, talking about Ukraine's main economic activities, the steel actually was one of the most important economic activity for Ukraine, large employer, large taxpayer. And right now, Russia destroyed two main steel plants in Ukraine, in Mariupol, Azovstal and Ilyich steel. Iron and steel works. So now that we need to rebuild back better, and the whole world is phasing out coal, so we, together with my colleagues from University of Oxford, Vlad Mikhnenko and Ali Devlin and Nicholas Salmon, we decided to look at how much investment is needed to recover Ukraine's steel sector in a green way. So our green way, it entails that the steel production is going from coal-based to hydrogen, direct reduced iron, and electric arc furnace route. So iron is made with the hydrogen, which is made from renewables, and then steel is made with the electric arc furnace, which also is run on renewables. So this green way and will generate an impressive 164 billion dollars in additional growth compared to coal-based steelmaking. Of course, we need investments, which is around $62 billion over 20 years, and this investment should be earmarked towards the renewable energy infrastructure, energy storage, and iron and steelmaking furnaces. But still, what we are seeing that this added value is growing very fast. And why we also looked at the steel decarbonization is because in the event of Ukraine's accession to the European Union, the country will become subject to the carbon pricing mechanism called European Trading Scheme, and where the carbon price is established usually at around $100 per ton of CO2. And even if this transition period and accession will take longer, Ukraine will still be subject to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will be the equivalent price of the carbon. So the EU will have to import Ukraine steel, but we will have to pay this carbon price, carbon border price. So that's why the Ukrainian steelmakers and the government should prioritize actually shifting to this green side of steelmaking, because it will become just not it will just become unprofitable to produce steel with the fossil fuels.
And looking at the geography of where these solar panels could be, placed, and of course wind turbines for maximum effectiveness, it seems that they are not in the traditional production centers of Mariupol and the eastern sort of Donbass region, but actually far closer in the west and north, including Carpathians and so on for wind generation. Also, if those export markets are in the EU, it makes sense to perhaps site those closer to the export points, close to the EU border. So this involves potentially some really radical rethinking of Ukraine's not just infrastructure, but the location of sort of main urban centers and the focus of reconstruction. That has a certain, I'm guessing, political contention around it, because also the government verbally is going to commit itself. No, we have to rebuild everything. We have to get Mariupol back. We have to get the settlements back in the east. But because of the scale of destruction, poisoning of the land, wiping out of the potential industries, mines, and so on, as well as them perhaps not being the best strategically placed areas, this is a difficult question which politicians, as well as experts like yourself, are going to have to grapple with.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And to make this study realistic as possible, we looked at two scenarios, which is a slow recovery and strong recovery. So slow recovery, it entails that Ukraine will have just a partial liberation of territory. So what is now occupied will stay occupied, and that we are accessing EU by around 2040. And the strong recovery is that the whole country's territory is deoccupied, of course, and the EU accession is Ukraine becomes a member of the EU by 2030. So with a slow recovery scenario, we saw, and also because the slow recovery also entails that the sea ports will stay blocked, and in strong recovery they are of course not blocked anymore. But looking at the slow recovery scenario, we found that it is more advantageous to build on a greenfields and in northwestern regions, so far from the front lines, and where plants can benefit from cheap renewables and proximity to rail border crossings, because the seaports will still be blocked. But actually, the renewables construction and locations for renewable generation is there across the whole Ukraine. So southern, eastern, northern, and northwestern regions, and they strike the balance between the reliability and intensity of solar and wind resources. But yeah, if we're talking about the slow recovery scenarios, then further from the front line and closer to the EU will be more beneficial, which is strange because yes, the iron ore resources we have in a kind of northeastern part of Ukraine, so Poltava Oblast, and but still the freight costs of transporting iron ore to, for example, northwestern regions is still cheaper than having this shipped to the EU from the eastern regions or southern regions.
Let's turn to the resilience of the energy grid itself, because again, at the moment, it's a very centralized system. There's certain legacy of the Soviet planning, although obviously equipment's been upgraded and improved and so on. And at the moment, there is a clear policy to try and distribute the pain evenly, so that when people, have, let's say, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours of lack of electricity, that is experienced at different times, different places, but there is an energy poverty in one area and energy wealth in another. There's a certain social distribution of that, and of course, an attempt to preserve the network. So when missile strikes are in progress, they may well shut down parts of the network in order to preserve it and, I guess, prevent surges and so on. How important is it going to be in the future energy policy to decentralize and create sort of local resilience, the ability for people to not only consume energy locally, but also contribute back into the grid if they have their own, let's say, sort of solar and wind capability?
Yeah, as I already mentioned, that distributed energy resources are the key for the energy security, and it also applies not to only attacks from the missiles, but we will have extreme weather events in the future, for example, and people will be also unevenly impacted, but they still need this access to electricity, to clean water, and of course, government should not forget about those vulnerable communities that maybe are not so active in attracting investments or grants, but still, yeah, need this access to electricity, of course, and heat during the winters.
Absolutely, and that, as we mentioned in the start of the video, Russia utilizes everything, whether it be energy, food, heat, etc., as a weapon. In order to fund some of the programs you're talking about, the investment in green steel and so on, is inward investment or investment from external investors and entrepreneurs in the West, both private and governmental. Is this crucial to have that external investment to make these things happen? And how much internal reform is going to be required within Ukraine to ensure transparency, efficiency, and so on in the process?
I think, yeah, of course, we have a lot of international support, grants, and loans, but still, the private investors are those who can kickstart Ukraine's economy and contribute to reconstruction. We need a foreign currency inflow to Ukraine, and luckily, some of those private investors are still investing despite the war. But some investors, of course, require right now the war risk insurance, which the government cannot afford. But there are organizations such as Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, they are seeking solutions. And for example, the German government was among the first ones who to implement the war risk insurance mechanisms for German investors in Ukraine. So if every government could try to implement the similar mechanisms, that would be very beneficial for Ukraine's economy. Because yes, of course, we have kind of missiles, flying every day, and they can destroy every asset in any moment. But the resources of the government and of the people are quite limited in Ukraine right now. So yeah, the investments are very important. And we actually have foreign investments into green energy in Ukraine. So wind power plants and solar power plants as well. And yeah, many foreign investors are still interested, but of course, without the war, we would be in much more better position to attract these investments. And answering your second question about the efficient use of energy funds, I think they are used of efficient actually, because a very quick emergency response, a very quick reconstruction, kind of emergency reconstruction of the energy facilities. So it could be that one day the Russia had struck a massive attack on energy facilities, and people have limited electricity, but on the next week the energy workers already kind of fixed it. Of course, it's only surface fixing, not something ground. Yeah. So, but still, I think that the energy funds here, they are used efficiently. I would say maybe in the peaceful times, I would say we still need to fight with the corruption in some areas, but I think Ukraine has been making a very good progress in terms of fighting with corruption, becoming more transparent and digitized country. So the level of corruption has been falling down steadily, and we just need the war to be over to finally start dreaming, implementing our ambitious projects, and tap into our potential. Yeah.
And has this, let's say, sort of the legal changes, the structural changes, the legislative changes, have these been impacted by the war? Have they slowed down, or actually is there an impetus to accelerate them and actually move faster to create sort of liberalized energy markets and align with the EU, for instance?
I would say that everything moves much more faster than before the war. And one of the reasons for that is that Ukraine is now in the negotiations, of course, with the EU to become a member. And that's why we have to implement a lot of directives and legislation from the EU example. And one of the also reason is that we have this 50 billion euro from the EU that we have to in like kind of Ukraine has already developed a plan for allocating this money, and which was approved by the EU. And according to this plan, there should be a lot of environmental and energy reforms. So, for example, because of this plan, we implemented the National Energy and Climate Plan by 2030. We already this plan is already approved, and it outlines a lot of changes in the electricity market. So, for example, that easy and permissions procedures for investments, which is very crucial right now. Also liberalizing electricity and natural gas prices, and just liberalizing the energy markets. having the introduction of the remit regulation to protect consumers and companies from the market manipulation, because as you might know, we have a lot of monopolies on the energy market. So for the coal energy, it's one monopoly, for the nuclear energy, another monopoly. So this is very important for consumers when the market will be liberalized to be protected from those manipulations. But also on the point of market liberalization, I would say that it's crucial, but as you understand that we have right now the prices, the caps on our energy bills, and this helps Ukrainian population to survive. And when the market will be liberalized, the prices will just jump. And taking into account that we have a lot of pensioners who have, for example, the minimum pension is about $60, and the cost of 1 kilowatt of electricity is around $1.20. And if a pensioner consumes 100 kilowatts, then that's already $120, which is twice as much as his pension. So yeah, I would say that this is a bit controversial, but of course crucial, but maybe for the peace times.
That certainly is a challenge, and we're going to be doing future episodes on the idea of not just a resilient reconstruction, but an inclusive reconstruction that ensures that the veterans, pensioners, and so on are not ostracized from the growth and redevelopment. But that's another topic for another episode. Well, I've just got one or two more questions left, but on that 50 billion package, it must have been really difficult, negotiating that, because on the one hand, the military requirement is so immediate, and there's a temptation potentially to use funds like that EU support package purely to help the military resilience right now. How difficult was that debate to ensure that energy and climate got some of that monetary assistance?
It was one of the requirements actually from the EU that 20% of investment component should be earmarked towards the green projects. So, but also Ukrainian government has been steadily, slowly but steadily focusing on climate change issues, on green projects, and a reform of the energy systems. So yeah, I think it's all combined, and people are starting to understand that these issues are crucial for future generations, for our obligations as an EU member, as the UNFCCC part, and yeah, so that was one of the requirements, to have this money allocated only for like some part of this money to be allocated only for green projects.
And if we look at the broad plans for resilient reconstruction, including energy and so on, is there any assumption built into that funds will come from reparations provided by Russia? That, of course, is a big political uncertainty. At this point, no one knows whether it will be dependent on someone who is not Vladimir Putin for those to be paid out. Of course, I think that's a fair assumption. Are these plans sort of building that in, or the idea that there may be no reparations received from Russia at all, and therefore plans are built on funds from partners and international institutions only?
Of course, we're counting on, the Ukraine is counting on those reparations, but we're hoping, but also that's not that, we actually understand that they will pay, and planning accordingly. Although there's around 300 billion of the frozen assets, Russian assets in worldwide, but somehow the governments cannot just take them and allocate them. I don't know, referring to that international law doesn't kind of allow it, and their internal laws don't allow it. But my question is whether the international law allows to kill people, rape, and do such atrocities that Russia is doing in Ukraine. That's a question. What the United Nations, of course, saying that yes, Russia has to pay the reparation and it's the right thing to do, but I don't think Russia listens to anyone, as we already saw. But of course, I think those assets should be kind of unfrozen and allocated to either construction of military equipment for Ukrainians in those countries, so the money stay within those countries where the assets are frozen, or allocated for Ukraine's reconstruction.
And this is the last question here. It's a very broad and open one. In your view, what are the top priorities for creating a resilient and inclusive reconstruction of Ukraine after victory?
I think before the victory, I would say the NATO membership will safeguard us, and the EU membership will safeguard us from the potential repeating of history, I would say, and this will provide us with the strong guarantees. In terms of military equipment, for example, we still need a lot of air defense systems and missiles and F-16 jets, so to actually be able to protect ourselves. And of course, after the victory, it is important to, again, just keep that pace of growth and development and green development again. So the government would be open to new suggestions, collaborations within the government and academia, with the international community. And there's a lot of things that could be done for successful recovery, and I think it will be one of the challenges and opportunities at the same time.
Well, Anastasia, it's been a huge pleasure speaking to you. I hope that as these reconstruction programs start to evolve and more detail becomes known, you'll come back onto the channel to help sort of explain that progress to us. For now, I'm hugely grateful to you for coming on and sharing your expertise and vision for Ukraine, despite the difficult circumstances under which we're talking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me and for raising such important topics.